this is Lady Boulay, and welcome back to Black American Lineage, a journey through our past. And today I want to talk about how black bodies have been used for medical research. And today we're going to talk about Henrietta Lack. What happened to Henrietta Lack was hidden from the public and from her family for a long time. It's disgraceful, but it's one of those things that we have come to know can happen to us in the United States. Henrietta Lack was born August 1st, 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. Her mother died, giving birth to her 10th child. Unable to care for the children alone after his wife's death, her father moved the family to Clover, Virginia, where the children were distributed among relatives. Henrietta ended up with her maternal grandfather in a 2-story log cabin that was once the slave quarters on the plantation that had been owned by her white great-grandfather and great-uncle. She shared a room with her 9-year-old first cousin and future husband, David Day. Like most members of her family, she worked as a tobacco farmer starting from an early age. She went to school up to the 6th grade when she had to drop out and help support the family. In 1935, when she was 14 years old, she gave birth to her first child, a son. And in 1939, she gave birth to a daughter. Both of these children were fathered by her cousin, David Day. On April the 10th, 1941, they got married and eventually they moved to Maryland. Living in Maryland, she and David had 3 more children. Henrietta Lack gave birth to her last child at Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1950. 4.5 months before that, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. On January 29, 1951, Henrietta went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was the only hospital in the area that treated black patients. She went to the hospital because she said she felt a knot in her womb. Her family kept saying, well, it was a baby. Well, she did have a baby, but she still had that knot. She started bleeding excessively, which they say she was hemorrhaging, and that is a sign to go to the hospital when after you had a baby, you start hemorrhaging. So she went back to Johns Hopkins, and her doctor took a biopsy of a mass found on her cervix. He sent it for laboratory testing. Soon after, she was told that she had a malignant cancer of the cervix. In 1970, it was discovered that she had been misdiagnosed and actually had an adenocarcinoma. This was a common mistake, they say, at that time, and the treatment would not have differed. She was treated with radiation tube inserts as an inpatient and discharged a few days later with instructions to return for x-ray treatments as a follow-up. During her treatments, 2 samples were taken from her cervix without her permission or knowledge. 1 sample was of healthy tissue and the other was cancerous. These samples were given to George Otto Gay, a doctor and cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. The cells from the cancerous sample eventually became known as the Gila immortal cell line, a commonly used cell line in contemporary biomedical research. On August the 6th of 1951, Henrietta, who was 31 years old, went to Johns Hopkins for a routine treatment session and asked to be admitted due to continual severe abdominal pain. She received blood transfusions and remained at the hospital until her death on October 4th, 1951. A partial autopsy showed that the cancer had metastasized throughout her entire body. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the family cemetery in a section of Clover, Virginia. In 2010, Roland Patillo, a faculty member of the Morehouse School of Medicine, who had worked with George Gay and knew the Lack's family, donated a headstone for Henrietta. Henrietta Lack's family first learned about the HeLa cells in 1973, so that's 22 years later. Researchers at Johns Hopkins approached her children for blood samples to learn more about the HeLa cells. A geneticist assistant called the family out of the blue to draw blood and told Day, her husband, that Henrietta's cells were still living. Now imagine getting this phone call from people that you don't know, asking you for blood and telling you that your wife, who has been dead for 22 years, that her cells are still living. I mean, these folks got some nerve. It was only in 1976 that a reporter uncovered the origin of the name HeLa, revealing in Rolling Stone magazine that the cells were from Henrietta Lack. Her family did not receive any compensation or recognition for the use of her cells. This George Otto Gay was the first to study her cancerous cells. He observed that these cells were unusual in that they reproduced at a very high rate and could be kept alive long enough to allow more in-depth examination. Until then, cells cultured for laboratory studies survived for only a few days at most. Henrietta Lack's cells were the first to be observed that could be divided multiple times without dying, which is why they became known as immortal. Her cells are still living. After her death, Gay had Mary Kubicek, his laboratory assistant, take further HeLa samples while Henrietta's body was at Johns Hopkins autopsy facility. So he took more tissue from her body after she died without anybody's permission. This Dr. Otto Gay was able to start a cell line from her sample by isolating one specific cell and repeatedly dividing it, meaning that the same cell could then be used for conducting more cells. So they were just experimenting and using her cells, and actually the weird thing about this, these cells have really helped people, and they're still growing. They're still multiplying. Henrietta Lack's cells are still multiplying, still being used in medical research, and still helping the scientific community. HeLa cells have been used in a variety of research fields, including testing the effects of radiation, cosmetics, toxins, and other chemicals on human cells. It was used in developing the first polio vaccine, gene mapping, and studying human diseases, especially cancer. Her cells were used in the developing the COVID-19 vaccine, investigating the effects of space travel and radiation on human cells, determining how salmonella causes infections, investigating blood disorders, advancing understanding of HIV, unraveling the secrets of the human genome, and cloning cells. There are 10 bullets up there that represent how these cells are helpful to the medical community. But each one of those bullets represents hundreds of areas of study, of research, information about treatment and curing of diseases. It's just amazing what her cells have done for medical science. Her tissue was used for cloning cells. Well, let's look at the advantages of cloning cells. Cloning of stem cells will provide treatment for a variety of diseases. It gives an opportunity to the parents to choose the characters and traits they want in their children and also eliminate the unwanted ones. Wow! It provides a better understanding of the hereditary genetic diseases. The endangered species of various animals can be preserved and no risk of any extinction. Now, this woman's cells are doing all of this. Infertile couples or same-sex couples could have children made from cloned cells. A clone could be a source for transplant organs or tissue. Cell cloning could assist scientists in gene editing and research. Now, some of this looks like taking it too far, but these are all of the possibilities that scientists can explore with this woman's cells, and her cells are still growing and multiplying. So she's still being a blessing, not just a benefit, but a blessing to medical science. And in some way, we are all benefiting from this black woman's cells. So let's summarize it. Henrietta Lack was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1951 and had tissue taken from her cervix without her consent during a procedure at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Lack died later that year from the cancer at the age of 31. The sample was later used to create a human cell line that can reproduce itself outside of the body, which is now known as HeLa cells. The cells have been used to develop the polio vaccine, in vitro fertilization, gene mapping, advancements in cancer treatment, AIDS research, cloning, and stem cell studies, and other things. It's a miracle line of human cells. Now let's get the update. In 2021, Lack's estate filed a lawsuit against Thermo Fisher Scientific, alleging that the company was mass producing and selling tissue taken from Lack's even after it became well known that the material had been taken from her without her consent. The suit was filed exactly 70 years after Lack's death. We want to make sure that the family's voice is finally heard after 70 years of being ignored. The prominent civil rights attorney Ben Crump, one of the lawyers representing Lack's estate, told CBS News in 2021, the American pharmaceutical corporations have a shameful history of profiting off the research of using and exploiting black people and their illnesses and their bodies. And that is a fact. Thermo Fisher Scientific has known that HeLa cells were stolen from Ms. Lack and chose to use her body for profit anyway, the lawsuit alleged. It has been previously reported that Thermo Fisher Scientific said they generate about $30 billion in annual revenue. In the lawsuit, Lack's estate asked that the company disgorge the full amount of its net profits obtained by commercializing the HeLa cell line to the estate of Henrietta Lack. The suit also sought an order stopping the company from using the HeLa cells without the estate's permission. Good for them. The terms of Tuesday's settlement, so they settled, that scientific laboratory settled with her family. The terms of Tuesday's settlement were not made public, but Crump said in a news conference that both parties were pleased to have resolved the matter outside of court, CBS Baltimore reported. So you can bet that family really got paid. And here's the thing. If they had asked them to let them use her tissue for scientific research and offered compensation for that, the family probably would agree to that in 1951. It wouldn't have even had to come to this. But that's what they do. She was black. She was not well educated, and they just took advantage of her. Well, okay, it's another day. Okay, you can get by, but you can't get away. So they got by for a long time, but they didn't get away. So that family is paid. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.